Don't touch the model! The bark cracked across the air like a whip, sharp enough to scatter a few pigeons from the tent roof. Lila pulled her hand back, her fingertips still carrying the scent of smoke, butter, and salt from the corn she'd been grilling all morning. A taut red rope stretched between two polished steel stanchions marked the border between her and the world inside. White display tables gleaming under bright lights, models that shimmered, screens dancing with green numbers. Behind her, the sweet, smoky aroma of buttered corn drifted in the late morning air. She could hear her father's steady call, "Hot corn, buttered corn," blending into the bustle of laughter and chatter from people moving between booths. The National Science Fair filled the entire city square. One half of the event was public-friendly, where visitors could wander among interactive exhibits. The other half, where she stood now, was the professional showcase guarded by security. Lila, 11 years old, wore a faded baseball cap pulled low against the sun. Her checkered apron was singed at one corner from brushing too close to the grill last week. She'd been circling this roped-off area since dawn, drawn back each time to one thing, a gleaming offshore wind turbine model in booth A3. From a distance, it looked like a giant toy. 3 white blades rising from a mock sea-painted cobalt blue, tiny pinprick lights along the frame to represent sensors. But every time the tent fans sent a breeze across it, she saw something she hated. A faint, wrong kind of vibration, the kind that didn't belong. She knew it well. It was the same uneasy tremor she'd felt years ago when a wind turbine blade out on the plains had slipped slightly out of alignment. That day, her father had sworn under his breath and spent hours under the punishing sun taking the bolts apart. Lila understood that feeling the way some people recognized a friend's voice in a crowd. She'd grown up near those turbines, watching her father check them, balance them, listen for sounds only he seemed to hear. She had that same instinct, only difference. Instinct didn't come with an access badge. "You need to stay behind the rope," the security guard reminded her for the 3rd time, less sharp now but still keeping his distance. "If you want to look, do it from here." She nodded and stepped back half a pace, tilting her head to get a better look. Her eyes found it again, down at the base of one blade where the shaft met the hub. Hidden in the shadow of the blade root, a small gusset plate was fixed slightly off from the position shown in the laminated diagram next to the model. Lila narrowed her eyes. If this were built at full scale and set out to sea, that tiny misalignment would pull the blade unevenly when the wind changed. She didn't know every word in the printed technical notes, but she knew the posture of a part just before it failed. She was still leaning toward it when she realized her hand was lifting. The guard's voice came again. "Don't touch!" She drew back, glancing at the blackened skewer still in her hand from the last cob she'd served. The charred tip reminded her of a fine-tipped pen. "That part's wrong," she said. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but her voice came out steady, carrying over the background music and chatter, straight to the ears of the people standing behind the display. A tall student with his hair tied neatly back, name tag gleaming on his chest, chuckled. "That's cute. Corn Girl thinks she found a flaw." His friends smiled in that distracted way of people too busy to really be unkind, but unwilling to be interrupted. Heat flushed across Lila's cheeks, the same prickling warmth she felt leaning too close to the grill. Her eyes stayed fixed on the gusset. "What part is wrong?" a low, even voice asked. The speaker was a woman with silver streaking her hair, thin-framed glasses perched low on her nose, a tablet tucked in her arm. The badge on her jacket read Judge. The students straightened at her presence, their grins slipping away. Lila hesitated. "That gusset, the bolt holes, they're off." She searched for words, but her thoughts didn't flow in sentences. They came in sensations. If the wind switches suddenly, "It'll shake!"
Like this.
She laid the skewer across the edge of the table, pressed one end down with her finger, and flicked the other. It shivered, uneven, one end bobbing too much. It won't break right away, but it'll tire here. She tapped a spot. And then it'll crack. Not when the wind is strongest, but just after it eases. Silence landed with a weight. The hair-tied student cleared his throat. Ma'am, this is our V2 prototype. Every dimension matches spec. That offset is just from the touring model. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. The judge handed him her tablet. Pull up the drawing. She crouched near the model, shifting her angle so the overhead lights poured into the shadow. Lila leaned too, her eyes brightening when she caught sight of the rim of the bolt hole. It wasn't perfectly round, it had the tiny unevenness of a hand-drilled plate. At the far end of the corn stand, her father caught sight of her by the rope. He set the butter brush down and called, "Lila!" His voice was swallowed by the crowd, just enough to make her turn her head for a second. She lifted a hand to say she was fine, then turned back, her pulse ticking with the whir of the ceiling fans. "What's your name?" the judge asked. Lila. Lila, are you just looking with your eyes, or do you have hands-on experience? She bit her lip. She hated boasting, but she hated letting a bad part slide even more. I used to help my dad fix blades at the old wind farm. I can show you. She scanned the table for something she could use, spotted a folded brochure. She unpinned her apron, rolled the paper into a tube, slid the skewer through to act as a shaft, then looped a piece of white twine loosely around one end, leaving it just off-center, exactly like the misaligned gusset. She set the paper blade across two paper cups. Here's the shaft, here's the hub, and this is the gusset. She blew gently across the open end, then switched direction suddenly. The tube wobbled with that same wrong rhythm, the twine tightening unevenly, and slid off one cup with an awkward jerk. The students glanced at each other. None of them had expected a scrap paper toy to so neatly mimic something in their engineering diagrams. The hair-tied student tried again. That's just because the cups aren't level. No, Lila said. She reset it, this time with pen caps under the cups as shims. The result was the same. She couldn't explain it in equations, but she knew the feel of a part under strain. The judge brushed a fingertip along the model's edge, the way a doctor might feel for a pulse. She tilted her head. She's right about the whole position. On the drawing, it's centered. Here, it's off by 1/10. She looked at the students. Who drilled this? A smaller student admitted, I did, just to make the deadline. We'll swap for a printed part later. Do you know what an offset like this can cause? He hesitated. Increased vibration in certain conditions. She already described the conditions. Tail-off winds, the judge said. She turned back to Lila, eyes softer now. How did you know? I heard it, Lila said simply. Same sound as the blade at Mr. Ramos's place when the bolts weren't tight. She braced for laughter, but none came. The quiet that followed felt like heavy fabric settling over the table. Her father was closer now, pressing through the crowd, still holding the butter brush. Sorry, she didn't mean any harm. She just likes looking. She's not causing trouble. His words carried the cautious weight of a man used to hearing that his place, and his child's place, was outside the rope. The guard began, Sir, could you take her back? But the judge lifted a hand. Wait. This girl has an eye. There's room for eyes like hers here. She spoke slowly, as if planting small stakes in ground that might shift. The words turned a few heads. Someone raised a phone to record. Others glanced away, uncomfortable. Lila didn't notice any of it. Her focus was still on the gusset and the tiny wrongness hiding there. Of course, the hair-tied student pushed back. This is just a model. In reality, all parts are perfect. We've simulated hundreds of hours. The vibrations are within limits. Did your simulation model tail off winds after a front? The judge asked sharply. He paused. I'll have to check. Check, she said, and then looked at Lila again. Would you like to explain more to them? Lila glanced at her father. He hesitated, his eyes flicking from the red rope to his corn stand. He gave the smallest nod. Be quick, then, he said, the way he said yes without giving anyone room to object. She took another brochure, sketching on it with the charred skewer tip. Wind doesn't just blow straight, she said, curving the line. It shifts. When it shifts, the tail of the airflow pulls backward like a stretched elastic, giving a little jerk. If the gusset's off, the force won't travel evenly to the bolts. It'll hug the shaft unevenly. That wears one side more than the other. At top wind, it holds. But when it eases just enough, the wobble matches the wear, and it snaps, like an old clothespin. She stopped, startled by how much she'd said. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. In them was the prairie, the smell of machine oil, the hiss of wind along the grass, the intake of her father's breath when the final bolt sat flush. The judge handed the smaller student her tablet. Record her description. Compare it to the 2018 case study. Then she told the guard, let her stand here. No touching, but she can watch. Lila almost stepped back, ready to give the white table world back to those who belonged. But then a man in a dark suit with a sponsor badge appeared, his face tight like a lid screwed too far down. His gaze swept from her scorched apron to her butter-stained sneakers, then to the judge. What exactly is going on here? We letting a kid from the food stand critique our display? No one's interfering, the judge replied evenly. We're listening to a field observation. A field observation? This child has what credentials? His smile was polite but never touched his eyes. None, Lila answered before anyone else could. I just sell corn, but I know when something's about to break. The simplicity of it made the man miss a step, as if someone had removed a stair under his foot. He glanced at the model, then at a reporter's camera. His smile widened. Of course, all feedback is valuable. But we shouldn't mislead the public about the quality of our project. Then verify it, the judge said calmly. Here. Now. Now? His brow creased. Now. She tapped the table. We have vibration sensors. We have the fan. We have the prototype. And a specific claim. Let's run it. The air inside the tent tightened. The outside noise faded. The carnival music, the popcorn crackle from her father's stand, all of it distant, like through glass. The smaller student hurried to connect wires, glancing between the screen and the gusset. Lila stood still, fingers brushing her apron hem for the familiar scorch mark. On, the judge ordered. The fan spun. The blades turned slowly at first, then faster. The graph on the monitor showed neat, even green bars. Lila watched the uneasy tremor begin to creep in. Change direction, the judge said. A technician adjusted the fan's angle. The airflow shifted. Not stronger, just different. The green bars wavered. A thin red trace climbed like a scratch across the display. The blades shuddered, just a whisper. But Lila knew the rhythm. It was the rhythm of a clothespin before it snapped. Enough, the sponsor said quickly. Too much interference here to conclude anything. One more time, the judge replied. Faster change. The technician switched angles sharply. The red line leapt higher, dropped, then spiked again. The blades vibrated, not violently, but enough to sing, a faint metallic ring, like a spoon against glass. Lila caught the instant the gusset shifted fractionally off-center. She held her breath. Stop, the judge said. The fan died down. Silence fell. Only a model, the sponsor muttered. Exactly, the judge said. And the model is speaking. She turned to the students. Include tail-off winds in your simulations and replace the gusset. The hair-tied student lowered his head. The smaller one looked at Lila, half grateful, half ashamed. Her father stood 2 steps outside the rope, eyes meeting hers. He didn't smile, just exhaled, a long, quiet breath. People have ways of saying well done without words. That was one. Lila started to back away, but the judge stopped her with a question. Lila, can you come back this evening? I have to work, she said. After work? We close around 7, her father said. 7:30, side entrance. The judge scribbled an address on a slip of paper. Not a pass, just a note. There's a place to look closer. You don't have to touch. Just watch. The sponsor laughed without warmth. You think you're recruiting from the food market? The judge didn't look at him. She looked at Lila. Sometimes the wind changes because one person points to the right place. She paused. See you tonight. Lila nodded, the paper crumpling slightly in her hand. She slipped back to the stand, the smell of butter and smoke wrapping around her. Her father handed her a fresh cob, butter melting golden over the kernels. He didn't ask, he just said, Careful, it's hot. I'm not afraid of hot, she said, smiling without thinking. I'm afraid of the wind being wrong. Behind her, the talk around the model went on. Ahead, the line for corn was growing. Somewhere between the two, a thin thread stretched across worlds, anchored by a single sentence she'd spoken that morning. By evening, the wind would shift again. And when it did, someone would be watching, making sure nothing broke in silence. By mid-afternoon, the air in the fair's main tent had thickened with heat, human voices, and the faint hum of electricity running to every display. Lila stayed behind the corn stand, working alongside her father. She didn't bring up the model again. But the fair had a way of carrying stories the same way wind carried scent, fast and invisible. Somewhere between the drone demonstration and the solar battery booth, people had begun whispering about a corn stand kid who'd spotted a flaw in the offshore turbine model. At first, it was just visitors glancing her way as they passed, mild curiosity in their faces, as if trying to match the rumor to the girl. Then a pair of students from another booth lingered too long, buying a single cob between them and staring at her while whispering. By the time the third group came, each holding a program booklet with Booth A3 circled, Lila knew the rumor had left its starting point and was looping the fair like a restless wind. Her father noticed too. You've got people looking at you like you're part of the exhibits, he said quietly, not quite pleased, not quite angry. His tone was the tone of someone who'd lived long enough to know that attention, especially on people like them, was a coin with 2 sides, one sharper than the other. I didn't ask them to, Lila said, pulling another cob from the grill. No, he agreed. But sometimes you don't have to ask for trouble. They worked in silence for a while. Then, as the lunch crowd thinned, a shadow fell across the stand. Lila looked up into the same silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes she'd seen at the rope that morning. Busy? The judge asked, her voice casual but carrying. Her father straightened. Selling, ma'am. What can I get you? Information, the judge said, though she smiled slightly. If you have a minute. Her father's shoulders tensed. About what? The turbine, she said plainly. He shook his head. She's a kid. Just leave it. But the judge's eyes didn't leave Lila. Can you tell me exactly why you thought that gusset was wrong? Lila hesitated, glancing at her father. He gave a small sigh, the kind that came from years of knowing when a conversation was already decided. Go on, he muttered, then busied himself with the grill. Lila wiped her hands on her apron. It wasn't just the bolt holes. The way it sat, there was a tiny tilt. The load wouldn't spread evenly. The judge leaned on the counter. And you know that because... Because I've seen it, Lila said. She looked down at her hands. When I was 8, my dad took a maintenance job at the old wind farm west of town. They had a blade acting up. He thought it was just the weather, but I could hear the wobble when it spun. I told him to check the plate under the hub. It was cracked halfway through. Her father looked over his shoulder. It wasn't cracked that bad. It was bad enough, Lila said softly. The judge's eyes narrowed, not in skepticism, but in calculation. Would you show me? On something small. Doesn't have to be fancy. Lila blinked. Now? Yes, I'll get the materials. Minutes later, Lila found herself standing at a side table near the judge's booth. The judge had brought paper, string, and a handful of washers. Lila rolled the paper, tied the string slightly off-center, and hung a washer on each end. Then she pulled the string taut and gave it a twist. The rolled paper began to spin, smooth at first, then with a faint irregularity. Lila shifted her fingers, simulating a sudden wind change. The spin wobbled, the washers tapping unevenly against the table. It's not about breaking right away, Lila explained. It's about the wear that happens when the load's never where it's supposed to be. The judge nodded slowly. You realize you've just described a form of harmonic vibration to me, in plain words. Lila didn't know the term, but she caught the approval in the judge's tone. One of the other judges, a man with a trimmed beard and a badge reading structural engineering, wandered over mid-demonstration. What's this? He asked. She's explaining tail-off vibration from a gusset misalignment, the woman said. The man smirked faintly. From a corn stand? The woman's voice cooled. From experience. The man folded his arms. All right then, ask her how she'd correct it. The question landed heavy. Lila stared at the paper model, then at the judge. She felt the weight of her father's words earlier. Attention has two sides. I'd drill the plate again, she said finally. Move the hole back where it lines up. The man raised his brows. Simple as that? No, Lila said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Because if you've already stressed it by drilling wrong once, you've weakened it. So you either reinforce it with another plate, or you replace it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the bearded judge gave a short laugh, not mocking, but impressed. Well, that's one way to put it. It's the right way, the woman judge said, eyes still on Lila. Back at the corn stand, her father didn't say much, but his silence was different now. It was the silence of a man turning something over in his head, checking it from all sides before deciding what to do. The fair rolled on around them. Drone races, chemistry demos that fizzed and smoked, school kids clutching balloons. But in certain corners, Lila caught the way people pointed at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Late in the afternoon, a group of engineering students from another booth came by, notebooks in hand. They asked her to look at their solar panel tilt frame. She almost refused, but curiosity tugged her forward. The frame looked fine, until she saw the pivot bolts. You're tightening against the wrong face, she said. It'll creep. Creep? One of them asked. She picked up a corn skewer, pressed it against the table edge, and pushed sideways. The tip bent slowly, not snapping, but losing shape. That's creep. The metal flows a little every time you load it wrong. One day you'll look and your panel's pointing at the ground. They scribbled notes, furiously. By the time the sun dipped low and the tent lights glowed warmer, the rumor had a life of its own. The corn girl who could see flaws was now a thing people wanted to test. Most were harmless. Kids asking if their paper planes would fly better if they folded them differently. But a few were serious. A man from a small wind startup even asked if she'd consider consulting. Her father laughed that one off. "She's got school," he said. But Lila noticed something. Every time someone walked away from their stand after talking to her, they glanced back. Some looked curious. Some looked doubtful. A few looked wary. It was the wary ones she remembered. That night, after they closed, her father loaded the last of the unsold corn into the cooler. "You still want to go to that side entrance?" he asked. Lila hesitated. "Do you think I shouldn't?" "I think you should know it's not just about turbines anymore," he said. "People don't like it when someone from outside points at their work and says it's wrong, especially when it's a kid." "I didn't say they were wrong," she said. "I said the part was wrong." He looked at her for a long moment. In their eyes, that's the same thing. She didn't argue. She just held the slip of paper the judge had given her, feeling the faint oil from her fingers soak into the fibers. As they wheeled the cart out, the fairgrounds had gone quieter, but somewhere in the main tent, she thought she heard the faint hum of a fan starting up again. Maybe they were already checking. She hoped so, because the wind didn't care who you were. It only cared if you were right. By 7:30, the fairgrounds had shifted into a different kind of life. The families had drifted home with their prizes and bags of kettle corn. The music from the main stage had softened to a tired hum. Vendors packed up in the cool air that came with dusk, the sky painted in the bruised purple between sunset and night. Lila stood by the cart, hands deep in the pockets of her hoodie. Her father was coiling the extension cord from the grill, looping it neatly the way he always did, every turn the same size. He worked in silence until he caught her watching. "You're sure you want to go?" he asked. It wasn't the kind of question you answered with words. It was the kind that made you check yourself one last time. Lila nodded anyway. "I just want to see." He studied her for a beat. "You've already seen enough to know." "I want them to see it too," she said. That earned her a slow exhale. He wiped his hands on a rag, then fished something from his jacket pocket, a small flashlight, battered and dented from years in the glove compartment. "Take this, and don't hang around if they start acting different." "Different how?" "You'll know," he said. The side entrance to the main tent was nothing like the public one. No banners, no welcome signs, just a flap of heavy canvas and the shadow of a guard leaning against a crate. The judge was already there, speaking quietly to him. When she saw Lila, she lifted a hand. "You made it," she said. Her voice was softer now, stripped of the formal edge it had when she was standing behind the display table. Lila glanced back at the path she'd come, where her father waited by the cart, arms crossed. He didn't wave. He just stood there until she disappeared inside. The air in the tent was different at night. Without the crowd, every sound carried: the creak of a chair, the buzz of an overhead light, the quiet thrum of machines left running. The turbine model stood on its table, its blades still. Around it, 3 people were setting up equipment: a man in a lab coat, a woman in a fleece vest, and the bearded judge from earlier. "This is the girl?" the man in the lab coat asked, not unkindly, but with a skepticism that weighed every word. "Yes," the woman judge said. "Lila, this is Dr. Fenton. He designed the prototype." Lila felt the room shift slightly. Or maybe it was just her. She had, in a way, told this man his work was flawed. She didn't know what to expect. He surprised her. "Show me what you saw," he said. She stepped up to the model. The red rope was gone. She could have reached out and touched the gusset now, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned in, tilting her head until the light fell exactly across the bolt holes. It's off-center, she said quietly. Not by much, but enough. Dr. Fenton crouched beside her, looking where she looked. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then he tapped the table. Fire it up. The technician in the fleece vest moved to the control board. The blades began to turn, slow at first, then faster, the familiar low rush of air filling the tent. On the monitor, green bars pulsed evenly. Direction change, Dr. Fenton called. The technician flipped a switch. The fan feeding the turbine shifted angle. The green bars wavered, and a thin red trace edged upward. That's normal, Fenton said. Again, the judge instructed. The fan moved more sharply. The red trace jumped. Lila's eyes fixed on the gusset. She saw it, the fractional shiver, the wrongness that had been itching in her all day. There, she said. Fenton followed her gaze. The technician frowned at the numbers. That's outside tolerance. Outside tolerance in a model, Fenton said, is outside tolerance in the real thing. His voice had tightened, but not at her. He straightened, running a hand over his jaw. We'll need to check the CAD files. The bearded judge spoke for the first time. That'll mean delaying the offshore trial. Fenton didn't answer. Lila stood back, feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. She had been right. But the air in the room had cooled in a way that wasn't about the evening chill. These people weren't just thinking about a gusset now. They were thinking about money, deadlines, and the kind of mistakes that got written into contracts. The judge broke the silence. Thank you, Lila. You've done something important. What happens now? Lila asked. Fenton looked at her, and for the first time there was no skepticism, only a kind of reluctant respect. Now we figure out how deep the problem goes. Outside, her father was waiting exactly where she'd left him. Well, he asked. They tested it, she said. It did the thing. He nodded once, no surprise in his face. And? They're not happy. They won't be, he said. But maybe now they'll fix it. They walked back to the truck in silence. Somewhere behind them, the tent lights flickered and held steady. Lila thought of the blades turning, the red trace climbing. The faces of the people in that room. She had wanted them to see what she saw. Now they had. And she had a feeling it was only the beginning. By morning, the fairgrounds were already breathing with a new pulse. It wasn't the easy hum of the day before. There was an edge in the air, as if something invisible had shifted in the night and left everyone glancing sideways at each other. Lila felt it the moment they wheeled their cart into place. The vendors on either side of the corn stand greeted them politely enough, but there was a quickness to their voices, like they were measuring what to say. A few minutes after they lit the first burners, a young man in a company polo from booth A3 passed by, eyes sliding over Lila as if she were another piece of equipment. He didn't stop, but she felt the weight of his glance long after he'd gone. Her father noticed, too. They're looking, he said quietly. They were yesterday, Lila reminded him. This is different, he said. The first rush of customers came, and for a little while she forgot about it. She fell into the rhythm of the grill, turn, brush, serve, take bills, make change. But every so often, she caught sight of someone loitering just beyond the line, not buying, just watching. Around mid-morning, a tall man in a dark blazer stepped up to the counter. He wasn't dressed like anyone else in the fair. No volunteer lanyard, no exhibitor badge. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came without warmth. Mr. and Miss, he began, glancing between them. Holt, her father said cautiously. We're selling corn. You want one? The man chuckled lightly, as if the question amused him. No, thank you. I'm here on behalf of North Shore Energy. one of the primary sponsors of the turbine project you were involved with last night. The tongs in her father's hand froze mid-air. Involved with? He repeated. The man spread his hands in a gesture meant to seem harmless. A bit of feedback from a curious young mind. Perfectly fine. But you see, in situations like this, accuracy matters. Words can travel in ways we don't intend. Lila said nothing. She knew what he was circling. Her father set the tongs down. She didn't lie. I'm not suggesting she did, the man said quickly. But sometimes an observation taken out of context can be misinterpreted. And when that happens, entire projects worth millions, can be jeopardized. Jobs, reputations. It's a heavy thing for a child to carry. Lila's stomach tightened. It's not heavy if it's true, she said before she could stop herself. The man's smile thinned. Truth is rarely the only factor, Miss Holt. Her father stepped between them, resting one hand on the counter. If you've got something to say it to me. All I'm suggesting, the man said, his tone smoothing again, is that you and your daughter allow the engineers to handle the technical details from here. No more demonstrations for the press or visitors. That way, we avoid confusion. I'd hate for there to be any unpleasantness. Unpleasantness? Her father repeated. Misunderstandings, the man corrected quickly. And to show our appreciation for your cooperation. He reached into his blazer and drew out an envelope. He set it gently on the counter, just far enough from Lila's hands, as if it might burn her. Her father stared at it. What's in there? A gesture, the man said. For your time. The envelope sat between them like a challenge. Lila could hear the faint pop and hiss of the corn on the grill behind her, the distant murmur of the fair. The whole world seemed to wait for what her father would do. He didn't touch it. We don't sell our words, he said finally. The man's eyes cooled. He slid the envelope back into his pocket without a sound. I'll take that under advisement, he said, and left as quietly as he had come. For the rest of the morning, Lila worked with the uneasy sense that something had marked them. Not on their clothes, not on the stand, but in the way people looked at them, and the way a few now avoided their line entirely. At lunch, the silver-haired judge appeared again. She didn't order corn this time. Did someone from North Shore speak to you? She asked. Her father's jaw tightened. Why? Because they're nervous, the judge said. And when sponsors get nervous, they try to control the story. What story? Lila asked. That a girl from a food stand spotted a flaw their own team missed, the judge said plainly. They don't want that told. Lila's father gave a short, humorless laugh. They're too late. People are already talking. That's why you need to be careful, the judge said, her gaze shifting between the two of them. They'll frame it as a misunderstanding if they can. Or worse. Worse? Her father asked. They could try to discredit you, she said. Say you were coached, or that you misunderstood basic principles. Once that's in print, it sticks. Lila thought of the man's smile, the envelope. They already tried something, she said. The judge's mouth tightened. Then it's starting sooner than I thought. That evening, after they closed the stand, they walked the long way around the fairground to the parking lot. The air smelled of fried dough and cooling asphalt. Lila kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting the man in the blazer to reappear. Her father noticed. Don't let them scare you, he said. I'm not scared, she said, though it wasn't entirely true. Good, he said. Because if you start doubting yourself, that's when they've won. As they loaded the cooler into the truck, a gust of wind rattled the flags along the fence. Lila looked up at them, flapping against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, real turbines stood in real wind, their blades turning, their gussets, good or bad, taking the load. She wondered how many of them had flaws no one had seen yet. The next morning broke with a sky the color of wet steel. The fairgrounds felt different, less like a celebration, more like a marketplace where deals were being made just out of sight. Lila sensed it even before they rolled the cart into place. Her father seemed to sense it too. He kept scanning the paths between the booths, as if counting who was there and who wasn't. By mid-morning, the crowd was thinner than the day before. Fewer casual visitors, more people with clipboards, lanyards, and the kind of expressions that came from thinking about deadlines instead of rides on the Ferris wheel. Lila was wiping down the counter when a man approached from the side. He wore a windbreaker zipped up to his chin, the hood half shielding his face. In one hand, he held a paper cup of coffee that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. "You're the girl who saw the gusset," he said without introduction. Lila straightened, unsure how to answer. "I guess." "You guessed right," he said quietly. His eyes flicked over her shoulder toward the main tent. "I worked on that plate. Not the model, the real one. Offshore unit. Same hole pattern. Same offset." Her father, who had been tending the grill, stepped closer. "And who are you?" "Doesn't matter," the man said. "What matters is, you were right. And they know you were right." Lila's fingers tightened on the rag. "Then why?" "Because fixing it means admitting it," he said, cutting her off. "And admitting it means millions in redesign costs, months of delays, maybe losing the contract altogether. That's not something North Shore is willing to risk." Her father's jaw set. "So they'd rather run it as is. They'll convince themselves it's within tolerance, that the simulation data covers it, that the ocean isn't as bad as worst case. They'll believe it because it's cheaper to believe it." The man took a step closer, lowering his voice until it was barely more than a breath. "There's talk about making you part of the public engagement campaign. Dress it up like they're honoring you, but really, it's to control what you say. They'll flatter you, put you in a press release, maybe offer you a junior consultant stipend, but it comes with a script." Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't want a script." "Then be careful," the man said. He set his coffee cup on the counter as if it were payment. "You didn't hear this from me." And with that, he melted back into the flow of people. Her father picked up the cup, looked at the black, cold coffee inside, and set it down again. "You believe him?" Lila nodded. "He didn't look like someone who came for corn." For the rest of the day, the fair felt like it was tilting. Twice, she noticed the man in the dark blazer from before, speaking with different groups. Once by the ticket booth, once near the north exit. Each time, his eyes swept the crowd like a searchlight. In the afternoon, the silver-haired judge stopped by. She didn't order corn this time either. "They're moving faster than I thought," she said without preamble. "Someone from the inside came to us," Lila said. "He said the real turbine has the same problem." The judge's eyes sharpened. "Did he give a name?" "No." "Good," she said. "Don't try to find out. The less you can identify him, the safer he is." Lila's father frowned. "Safe from what?" The judge hesitated. "From being the reason a billion-dollar project stalls." That evening, as they wheeled the cart toward the parking lot, the wind picked up, flapping the canvas banners overhead. The sky was darker than it should have been for the hour. Lila looked up at the shifting clouds and thought of the blades at sea, turning in winds like this, their flawed gussets carrying every uneven load. Her father glanced at her. "You're thinking about it." She didn't deny it. "If we know it's wrong and they know it's wrong and they still put it up, what happens when it breaks?" His face was grim in the fading light. "Someone gets hurt, or worse." Lila didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The question had already taken root between them. How far would they go to make sure that didn't happen? The invitation came folded inside a glossy brochure from the North Shore Energy booth. It was slid across the corn stand counter in the early afternoon by a young woman in a company polo, her smile bright but practiced. "For you," she said, tapping the brochure once. "Tonight, 7 o'clock, Executive Lounge. Side entrance, same as before." Lila's father took it before Lila could. "What's this?" "A recognition," the woman said. "Our sponsors were impressed by your daughter's keen observation skills. They'd like to thank her in person." "Thank her or talk to her?" he asked. The woman's smile didn't move an inch. "Both, I suppose. It's a good opportunity." She walked away before either of them could answer. Lila's father flipped the brochure open. Inside, between photos of gleaming turbines and smiling engineers, was a single page printed in a heavier stock. North Shore Energy. Private Sponsor Reception. Guest, Lila Holt. Attire, casual time, 7 o'clock p.m. At the bottom, a note in smaller font. Discussion on Youth in STEM initiatives. Lila read it twice. "They're going to try to keep me quiet." "Then maybe we don't go," her father said. She hesitated. "If we don't go, they'll think we're afraid." "Maybe we should be," he said. They argued quietly while tending the grill, neither raising their voice above the hiss of butter on hot kernels. In the end, they agreed on a compromise. She could go, but only if he came with her. By the time they arrived at the side entrance, the sky had fallen into that deep indigo that made the white of the tents glow faintly from within. A security guard checked their names off a list and pulled back the flap. Inside, the executive lounge was nothing like the fairground's public spaces. No bright banners or science posters, just a carpeted floor, low lighting, and a spread of catered food arranged with the precision of a showroom. Along one wall, a line of tall-backed chairs faced inward like the edge of a circle. Lila counted 6 people already seated. All wore suits or dresses. The man in the dark blazer, the one with the envelope, was among them. He smiled at her as if they were old friends. "Lila," he said warmly, "we're so glad you could join us." Her father didn't return the smile. "Let's keep this short." "Of course," the man said. "Please, sit." They were offered drinks, water for Lila, coffee for her father. The conversation began with pleasantries, questions about her school, her interests. Then it shifted. "You've become quite the name around here," said a woman with a pearl necklace. "A lot of people talking about how sharp you are." Lila sipped her water. "They're talking about the turbine." The woman chuckled. "Yes, and we want to make sure they're talking about it the right way." The man in the blazer leaned forward. "Which is why we'd like to invite you to be part of our Youth in STEM initiative. Appear in a few photos. Maybe say a few words to the press about how inspiring the fair has been." Lila glanced at her father, then back at the man. "What words?" "Oh, just something about how exciting it is to learn from engineers. How much you've enjoyed seeing real projects up close. Positive messages." "And nothing about the gusset," Lila said flatly. The man spread his hands. "That's a technical matter for our team to handle. No need to confuse the public." "It's not confusing," Lila said. "It's wrong." The room cooled by a degree. The man's smile stayed, but it had become tight at the corners. "Sometimes, Lila, in the real world, there are things that can be technically imperfect, but still entirely safe." "That's not what Dr. Fenton's face looked like," she said. Her father's hand touched her arm, a small warning. But the damage was done. Several of the suits exchanged glances. The woman with the pearls spoke again, her tone softer. "We're not your enemy, dear. We're offering you a chance to be celebrated, to be part of something bigger than yourself. I want to be part of something that works, Lila said. The man in the blazer sighed as if disappointed. We could make this very easy for you and your family, or we could let things become unnecessarily complicated. Her father's voice was low but steady. Is that a threat? Not at all, the man said quickly. Just the reality of how stories are told. Once the media gets hold of something, it's out of everyone's hands. Better to guide it. Lila looked around the circle of faces and realized they weren't here to celebrate her. They were here to fence her in, politely, smiling with all the trappings of generosity, but still a fence. She set her water down. I don't need my story guided. The man in the blazer's eyes lingered on her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, broader this time, and leaned back. We'll see. When they left, the night air felt sharper than it had going in. Her father walked beside her without speaking until they reached the parking lot. They won't stop, he said finally. Lila thought of the turbines offshore, turning through the dark. Neither will the wind, she said, and for the first time she realized she didn't plan to stop either. The morning after the reception, the fairgrounds seemed quieter than usual, as if the night's conversations had left a residue in the air. Even the music from the main stage felt subdued, its cheerful notes not quite masking the low hum of generators. Lila was sweeping under the corn stand when she spotted it, half hidden under a paper plate and a crumpled napkin, caught against one of the stand's wheels. It was a folded sheet, heavier than normal fair flyers, with a faint watermark that shimmered when she shifted it in the light. She almost tossed it into the trash bag, but something in the way it was folded, precise, twice lengthwise and once across, made her pause. She unfolded it carefully. The header read, North Shore Energy, Structural Integrity Field Report, Unit ID, OSW3B. Below that were tables, numbers, and a few shaded diagrams. She didn't understand all of it, but one column caught her attention. Bolt hole offset, MM. For most entries, it read 0.0. But for one, hub plate assembly, blade C2, it read 2.6. She didn't know what the number should be, but she knew it shouldn't be 2.6. Where'd you get that? Her father's voice made her flinch. He was behind her, arms crossed. It was under the wheel, she said. He took the sheet, scanning it slowly, his brow furrowed deeper with each line. This is from an actual unit, offshore, not a model. They tested it, Lila said. And it's wrong. Her father folded the paper again, sharper this time. We shouldn't have this. But if we give it back, it disappears, she said, and they keep saying it's fine. He looked at her for a long moment. This isn't just about proving you're right anymore. This is about contracts, liability, lawyers. Or people getting hurt, she said. He didn't answer. At lunch, the silver-haired judge stopped by again. Lila slipped the folded paper across the counter under a napkin. Where'd you get this? The judge asked, lifting the napkin. Found it, Lila said. The judge scanned the numbers. Her jaw tightened. This should not be in the trash. Then why was it? Lila asked. Because someone doesn't want it to exist, the judge said. And if they know you have it, they'll come for it, Lila finished. The judge slid the paper back under the napkin. Keep it safe. Don't make a copy, not yet. Let me confirm what I think this means. Which is, her father asked, that the exact flaw you found in the model exists on at least one real turbine, and it's already spinning at sea. The rest of the day felt like moving under glass. Lila kept seeing the man in the dark blazer at the far end of the fair, talking to people with that same too-wide smile. Once he caught her eye and raised a hand in a lazy half-wave. She didn't wave back. By closing time, The folded paper was tucked into the lining of her hoodie pocket, the seam slightly open where she'd picked it loose. She felt its weight with every step back to the truck. Her father didn't speak until they were halfway home. "If this goes bad, Lila, if they decide to make an example, then at least people will know," she said. He didn't answer, but she noticed he checked the rearview mirror more often than usual. That night, lying in bed, Lila pulled the paper from her hoodie and spread it out under the dim light of her desk lamp. She traced the diagrams with her finger, imagining the offshore wind, the constant push and pull on those blades. Somewhere out there, one of them had a flawed gusset just like the model, and somewhere, someone already knew and had decided to do nothing. She folded the paper again, slid it under her pillow, and stared at the dark ceiling. Tomorrow, she decided, would not be like today. The next day began like any other, at least on the surface. The smell of frying dough drifted over from the food court, the carousel music looped in the distance, and the sun was bright enough to bleach the canvas tops of the vendor tents. But Lila felt the difference before the first cob even hit the grill. The air was tight. Conversations around the fair seemed clipped. The laughter shorter, the glances sharper. It was the way a schoolyard felt right before a fight. People didn't know what was going to happen, but they knew something was. By mid-morning, she spotted the man in the dark blazer again, but this time he wasn't alone. Two other men in suits flanked him, moving through the fair with an efficiency that looked out of place among the wandering families. They weren't browsing. They were looking. Her father noticed, too. "Keep your head down," he murmured. It didn't work. Just after noon, a voice rang out near the public stage. "And here she is, the young lady everyone's talking about. Lila Holt." It was the fair's master of ceremonies, grinning under his straw hat, oblivious to the currents under the surface. He beckoned toward the corn stand. "Come on up here, Lila. Say a few words to the folks about what you've learned this week." Her father stiffened. "We're working," he called back. "Oh, just a minute," the MC urged. "The crowd's dying to hear from her." Lila looked toward the stage. The man in the blazer stood just beyond it, arms folded, watching. The two other suits stood at the edges of the crowd, their eyes on her. Her father leaned close. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but if I don't, they'll keep owning the story." Before he could stop her, she was walking toward the stage. The crowd parted as she climbed the steps. The MC handed her the microphone with a flourish. "Tell us, Lila, what's it like to be the sharpest set of eyes at the National Science Fair?" She glanced at the man in the blazer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's strange," she began. "Strange because I wasn't trying to be noticed. I was just looking at something and saw it wasn't right." A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras and phones lifted. The MC chuckled. "And what did you see?" She took a breath. "A part on a turbine model that was drilled wrong. A small thing, but small things matter when they spin in the wind." The man in the blazer shifted slightly. One of the suits took a step forward. The MC laughed again, nervous this time. "Well, isn't that something? And of course the engineers told me they'd take care of it," she said, cutting in. "But yesterday I saw a report, and it said the same problem exists on a real turbine, one that's already at sea." The air went still. For a moment, even the carousel music seemed to fade. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice called, "Is that true?" The man in the blazer stepped forward, his voice carrying. "Let's not spread confusion, folks. Prototypes and field units are very different things." "It wasn't a prototype number," Lila said, her voice clear over the PA. "It was a unit ID, OSW-3B, bolt hole offset, 2.6 millimeters. The crowd murmured. People looked at each other. Some began typing into their phones. The man in the blazer's voice hardened. Miss Holt, you are misinterpreting technical. It's the same flaw, she said. The same flaw I saw in the model. And if the wind changes the wrong way, that part can fail. The murmurs turned into a low roar. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Do you have proof? Lila hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the folded paper, holding it up for everyone to see. The crowd surged forward. Cameras clicked. Someone shouted for her to read it. That was when her father appeared at the edge of the stage, his jaw set, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't tell her to stop. He just gave the smallest nod. So she read. She read the unit ID, the offset measurement, the field test notes in the margins. She read them into the microphone so no one could say later they hadn't heard it. When she finished, the fairground was no longer just a fairground. It was a press room. Questions flew from every direction. The man in the blazer was already on his phone, speaking in a clipped, urgent voice. Her father stepped up beside her, taking the microphone. "We're done here," he said, and guided her down the steps. Back at the stand, the first thing she noticed was the crowd forming, not for corn, but for answers. Reporters, fairgoers, even a few engineers pressed in. "Is this retaliation for something?" one asked. "Will you testify if asked?" another shouted. Her father kept his body between her and the questions. "No comment," he said, again and again. When they finally closed for the day, the sun was low and the fair's noise was a distant hum. As they walked to the truck, Lila knew there was no going back. The paper wasn't hidden anymore. The words were out in the open. She looked at her father. "They can't put it back in the trash now." "No," he said, "but they'll try to bury you instead." The wind picked up as they reached the lot, snapping the edge of the tent canvas behind them. Lila thought of the turbines again, how they turned no matter who was watching, how the wind didn't ask permission to change. Neither would she. By dawn the next morning, the fairgrounds weren't just a fair anymore. They were a newsroom. News vans idled along the curb, their telescoping masts bristling with antennas. Camera crews threaded cables through the grass. Reporters in crisp jackets rehearsed stand-up segments in front of the main tent. Lila watched from the passenger seat of her father's truck, the folded field report still in her hoodie pocket. "They're here for the turbine," she said. "They're here for you," her father replied. They parked by the vendor lot. Even before the grill was hot, people were approaching the stand, not to buy corn, but to ask questions. "Did North Shore contact you? Do you fear retaliation? Will you release more documents?" Her father handled them with the same steady no comment he'd used the day before, his tone flat enough to deflect but not escalate. But not everyone was so easily deflected. Around mid-morning, the man in the dark blazer appeared again, walking straight to the counter. His smile was gone. "Congratulations," he said to Lila. "You've managed to cause a national media stir. I hope you're proud." Lila's father stepped between them. "We're busy." "You're done," the man said coldly. "The lawyers are drafting a statement. It will say you misunderstood proprietary documents and spread misinformation. It will include affidavits from engineers. You'll be a footnote by next week." Lila looked him in the eye. "Then why are you still here?" For a moment his jaw tightened. Then he leaned closer, his voice low enough for only them to hear. "Because if you think you can win this, you're wrong. You've got nothing but a scrap of paper. We have the rest of the file." He turned to leave, and that's when the voice came from behind him. "She's not wrong." Everyone turned. It was Dr. Fenton, the lead engineer from booth A3. His lab coat was gone. He wore a windbreaker, the hood down, his hair tousled by the breeze. He looked tired but resolute. The man in the blazer froze. "Careful!" "Fenton?" "I've been careful long enough," Fenton said. He stepped up to the counter, facing Lila. The OSW-3B unit has a gusset misalignment of 2.6 millimeters. The simulations didn't account for tail-off winds. She saw what we missed. Reporters swarmed closer. Microphones appeared. "Are you confirming her claim?" someone shouted. "Yes," Fenton said, his voice carrying. "And I'm adding mine. If it's not corrected, it's a structural risk." The man in the blazer's face was a mask. "You've just violated your NDA." "Good," Fenton said. The questions came fast, too fast. Lila heard fragments, corporate cover-up, safety risk, government oversight. But her pulse was too loud in her ears to catch them all. Her father put a hand on her shoulder. "We need to go." They left the stand closed for the rest of the day. In the quiet of the truck, Lila unfolded the field report and set it on her lap. "Why would he do that?" she asked. Her father kept his eyes on the road. "Because sometimes being right isn't enough. You need someone on the inside to say it too." She thought about Fenton's face, how it had shifted from guarded skepticism the first time they met to something else today, something that looked a lot like conviction. That night, their phone rang twice, once from a reporter offering to pay for an exclusive, and once from an unknown number that left no message. The second call left a heavier silence in the room. Her father unplugged the phone before they went to bed. "You think they'll really try to bury us?" she asked in the dark. He sighed. "They already are. The question is whether we stand still while they shovel." She lay awake long after, listening to the wind against the windows, thinking about turbines spinning somewhere out there, spinning with that same wrongness she'd seen in the model, and thinking about the fact that tomorrow she might have to decide how far she was willing to go to make sure they stopped. 2 mornings later, the fairgrounds felt different again, but this time, it wasn't tension in the air. It was anticipation. News crews had multiplied overnight. Stands of cameras lined the main entrance. A makeshift podium had been set up in front of the main tent, flanked by banners that had once read North Shore Energy Presence, but now had their sponsor's name covered with plain white cloth. Lila and her father arrived early, parking at the far end of the vendor lot. They didn't fire up the grill, they didn't set out the corn. Instead, they stood together at the edge of the crowd forming near the podium. The silver-haired judge was there, speaking with Dr. Fenton. Both spotted Lila and made their way over. "It's happening," the judge said quietly. "They're making a public statement." "Because of the report?" Lila asked. "Because of you," Fenton said. "And because once you said it out loud, they couldn't pretend it didn't exist." Her father gave a small nod toward the podium. "Let's see if they tell it straight." A man in a navy suit stepped to the microphone. His tie was too perfect, his hair unmoving in the breeze. Lila recognized him from the sponsor reception. A different face, but the same careful corporate tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "North Shore Energy is committed to the highest safety standards in all our projects. Following recent observations made during the National Science Fair, our engineering team conducted additional field inspections on several offshore units. These inspections revealed a manufacturing variance in one unit's hub plate assembly." He paused, scanning the crowd. Cameras clicked in the brief silence. "This variance, while still within certain operational tolerances, has the potential to affect performance under specific wind conditions. Out of an abundance of caution, we are temporarily suspending operation of that unit and will be retrofitting all similar assemblies across our fleet." There it was. Not an admission of guilt, but an action they couldn't take back. A reporter called out, "Was the variance identified by Lila Holt?" The man gave a careful smile. "The observation was brought to our attention during the fair. We appreciate the enthusiasm of young minds engaged in STEM education." It was polite, It was evasive, but it was public. Lila's father leaned close. That's as much as you're getting from them. She wasn't sure if she should feel satisfied or cheated. She'd wanted them to say the words, "She was right." But maybe this was what winning looked like in their world. Not acknowledgement, but change. After the statement, the judge pulled Lila aside. "You know they'll spin this," she said. "They'll make it sound like they caught it themselves." "I don't care," Lila said. "As long as they fix it." The judge's eyes softened. "That's the right answer." Dr. Fenton stepped forward, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "I can't give you the actual part," he said, "but I can give you this." She unwrapped it. Inside was a section of machined aluminum with 3 perfect bolt holes drilled clean and centered. "It's from a training unit," he said. "How it's supposed to be." Lila ran her fingers over the smooth metal. "Feels different." "It is," Fenton said. "And so's the wind, when you've done something to change it." The rest of the fair was a blur. Strangers came by to shake her hand, to take photos, to ask what she wanted to be when she grew up. She didn't have an answer for them. That night, after the last day of the fair, she and her father stood by the empty grill. The air smelled faintly of smoke and salt from the sea. He handed her the wrapped aluminum part again. "You're keeping this," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because one day," he said, "someone's going to tell you a thing can't be changed, and you'll remember this, and know they're wrong." She thought about the red rope on the first day, the way the guard had told her not to touch the model. She thought about the paper from the trash, the room with no windows, the stage where she'd read the numbers out loud. And she thought about the turbines offshore, turning now with gussets drilled right. "Okay," she said. They packed up the cart in silence, the fairgrounds behind them going dark, one tent at a time. As they drove away, the wind picked up, rattling the flags along the road. Her father glanced at her. "Feels like it's coming from a different direction tonight." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." The truck rolled on into the dusk, carrying a piece of metal in brown paper, and the memory of a week when one small voice had been enough to make the wind change. "Thank you for staying with me until the end." Lila's story reminds us that no matter where we stand, if we dare to speak the truth, we can still change the direction of the wind. If this story touched you, please share it so more people can be inspired.